In the valley of Storrvik, where the mountains stood tall and the fjords ran deep, there lived a man named Sigmund, a farmer, a father, and a man of quiet strength. But do not mistake his stillness for weakness. Sigmund was once a raider, a man of the sword, a brother-in-arms to Valgrin the Red, his own flesh and blood. Together they had stood upon the decks of longships, had felt the sting of sea spray and the heat of burning villages. Together they had killed, plundered, and bathed in the wealth of conquest. But for Sigmund, the fire of war burned out before it could consume him. The gold they took, the lands they razed, it was enough. He had seen what men became when they fed on blood. And so when he had made his fortune, he chose to turn away. Where others sought the glory of battle, he sought the wisdom of the land. Where men knelt to the old gods, he questioned them. Where Valgrin burned, he rebuilt. He settled in Storrvik, took a wife, raised children, and turned his hand to the soil, believing there was greater strength in creating something that could last beyond a lifetime than in taking what would be gone by the next tide. He did not call himself a Christian, not yet, but he had sat in the halls of Saxon lords, had listened to their priests speak of their one God and a different way of life. And though he did not pray, he pondered. And though he did not kneel, he wondered. But if Sigmund had turned from the old ways, Valgrin embraced them. He had never stopped raiding, never stopped fighting. While his brother built a quiet life, Valgrin built a name. He fought for warlords, for earls, for kings across foreign lands. He stood beside the great warriors of Norway, feasted in the halls of the mighty. He knelt before King Harald himself, was honored for his valor, and had made bonds with men whose names carried power. Where Sigmund saw war as brutality, Valgrin saw it as purpose. Where Sigmund sought peace, Valgrin sought glory. He was a man of the old gods. Odin's wolves ran in his blood, and he swore that when he died, it would be with a sword in hand, so that he might feast in the halls of Valhalla. The fire crackled in the great longhouse of Storrvik, sending embers swirling into the thick, smoky air. Outside, the wind howled through the valley, rattling the wooden beams and carrying with it the distant call of a raven. The scent of roasted meat and spiced ale filled the hall, mingling with the laughter of men who had worked hard and now feasted beneath a roof that had stood for decades. At the high table, apart from the revelry, sat two men. One was Sigmund, a man of quiet strength. His hands, though scarred from years of wielding an axe, were now the hands of a farmer. His tunic, simple and worn, carried the scent of soil and the work of the land. His face, lined with years of toil, bore no malice, only the weight of thought. Opposite him, leaning back in his chair with a lazy confidence, was Valgrin the Red. His face was weathered, lined not by the burdens of land but by war. His armor, finely crafted but battered, still bore the scars of a dozen battles. His eyes burned with something unrelenting, a fire that had never cooled, a hunger that had never faded. The longhouse hummed with the voices of Storrvik's people. Farmers, traders, fishermen, all gathered to drink and celebrate the end of another day's labor. But at the high table beneath the flickering torchlight, a different kind of exchange was unfolding. Valgrind let out a short laugh, shaking his head as he turned a cup in his hands. "You look at me as though I am a ghost, brother," he said, his voice rough with years spent barking orders on foreign shores. Sigmund regarded him carefully, taking a slow sip of his ale. "A ghost would be quieter," he said. The hall rippled with soft laughter, though those nearest kept their eyes on their food. Few dared to interrupt a conversation between the two brothers. Valgrind grinned, resting his elbow against the table, surveying the longhouse. "You've done well, Sigmund," he admitted, though there was an edge to his tone. "When we were young, I never thought you would settle into the life of a landowner. You were as fierce as any of us once. Do you remember the way you fought in the raids on the Northumbrians? You stood at my side, your axe heavy with Saxon blood." His eyes flicked toward the great beams of the hall, toward the men feasting on fresh bread and salted fish, the air thick with warmth rather than the scent of burning thatch. Valgrind exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "And now you sit beneath a roof of your own making, worrying about grain and trade routes. How strange life is." Sigmund set his cup down, his face unreadable. "You speak as if I have forgotten who I am," he said, "but I remember every battle, every kill. The difference between us is that I did not mistake war for purpose. It was a means to an end. And that end was here. A home. A legacy." For a moment, Valgrind said nothing. The fire crackled between them, shadows dancing across his face. Then his smirk returned, but this time it was thinner, more calculating. "And what legacy is that?" he asked. "To live as a farmer? To sit and wait for the years to take you, while others carve their names into history?" Sigmund held his brother's gaze, his voice steady. "To build something that lasts." A gust of wind whistled through the cracks in the wooden walls, rattling the torches. A few men turned their heads, muttering that a storm might be coming. Valgrind leaned forward, his tone quieter now. "I have seen towns like this before, brother." Sigmund's expression did not change, though a flicker of something, caution, curiosity, crossed his eyes. And Valgrind tapped his fingers against the table. "And I have plundered them." The fire crackled, filling the silence that followed. "You think yourself safe because you have wealth, because you have trade, but that only makes you a more tempting prize. Storrvik has no warband, no walls. You have men, yes, but they are farmers, not warriors. And the only thing standing between you and ruin is the hope that your neighbors remain content with their own fortunes." Sigmund studied him, his fingers tightening slightly around his cup. His voice was measured, controlled. "And what would you have me do?" Valgrind exhaled, leaning back again, the tension momentarily leaving his shoulders. "Choose a leader, a war chief. Train men to fight, build fortifications, raise a banner. If not you, then another." Sigmund shook his head. "Power corrupts, Valgrind. If I name a Jarl, they will take more than I give. They will demand war when it is not needed, tribute when it is not owed. I will not trade one danger for another. Valgrind exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Then when the raiders come, and they will come, do not say I did not warn you. Another silence stretched between them, the firelight flickering between their faces. Valgrind pushed back his chair and stood, adjusting the wolf fur cloak draped over his shoulders. One day, brother, we will see who is right. Sigmund did not rise. He only watched as Valgrind strode from the hall, stepping out into the cold night. The wind howled as the heavy wooden doors swung shut behind him. The longhouse, once filled with laughter, seemed quieter now. The men drank, the fire burned, but something unspoken lingered in the air. A raven cawed outside. Sigmund exhaled, turning his gaze to the flames.